Good afternoon, good morning, everyone. Happy New Year to you. This is Captain Michael Verdugo, Deputy Director, Division of Commission Personnel Support. On behalf of our Director, Captain Angela Matungwa, and our entire DCPS team, we're grateful that you were able to take some time out of your busy schedule and join us for the January IHS Corps Officer All Hands Call. Before we get started, we'd like to recognize we have a member of IHS senior leadership. We have Rear Admiral Brandon Taylor, the Chief of Staff of the Indian Health Service, has graciously joined us and will be giving us some opening remarks. Admiral Taylor, the floor is yours, sir.
Great, thank you, Captain. Just doing a comms check real quick.
Very good, sir.
Can you hear me okay?
Can hear you loud and clear.
Very good, thank you. Thank you, Captain. Thank you to DCPS for taking the initiative to set these regular all-hands calls up for all of our IHS officers across the country, and grateful for their leadership in doing so and amplifying and maybe even clarifying information that we're getting from Commission Corps headquarters and others. So kudos to the whole team. This is a big lift to take care of these meetings. On behalf of Admiral Wiaki and all of senior staff and headquarters, I just want to thank each of you for all that you're doing. We're now approaching a full year of response activities and response posture. So we are just blatantly polite. We're just in awe of each of you, of the work that you do, the effort that is going into taking care of our patients and helping mitigate the spread of COVID-19, in practicing the 3 W's, in teaching others about the 3 W's, and just being outstanding public health servants and stewards. We recognize that many of you on the front lines have worked tirelessly and have missed vacations, have missed anniversaries, have missed weddings, have missed many different activities over the past many months. And we hope that as best as practicable, that you're getting some leave, some R&R, some time away to unplug and rest and recover. Just know that on behalf of Admiral Wiaki, we are concerned for you, concerned for your health and well-being and your mental health, and implore each of you to take care of one another and take care of yourselves, of course, as you take care of your families as well. We wish each of you a happy new year, and we're just beside ourselves and thrilled with the vaccine and the work that goes on now to administer the vaccine, not only to our healthcare workers, each of you, but also our patients who are at greatest risk, and over time to all who desire to receive the vaccine. Just thrilled with Admiral Frazier here at headquarters and his team, coupled with Commander Kaylee Fretlin and Commander Holly Van Loo and their leadership, as well as many other officers who are just doing phenomenal work. Captain Rob Hayes and Captain Matt Miller and Andrea Climo and Karsten Smith and many, many others at NSSC in Oklahoma City to provide PPE and therapeutics and on and on. So we are mindful of the activities going on in the areas. We meet regularly with our area directors and area leadership to get a temperature and understanding of what the needs are in the field, and we're doing our best to meet those needs. So again, thank you for all that you do. We really do appreciate you. We see what you're doing, we hear what you're doing, and we couldn't be more proud. So I'm really looking forward to the topics today that DCPS has prepared for us, and again, thank them and turn the time back over to them. Thank you, Captain.
Thank you, Admiral Taylor, and thank you for the encouraging words and the enduring support that we enjoy as officers from our senior leadership. So thank you for the wonderful remarks. Before I move forward, I just want to pause and ensure that we are recording the presentation. Operator, has recording been enabled?
Captain, we are recording.
Excellent. All right. Thank you very much. So today's agenda, what we intend to review with everyone, starting with IHS officer eligibility for positions, and just give you all as officers a brief introduction and overview to how officers are eligible for positions within the Indian Health Service. Next, we'll discuss position grades for PHS officers and provide a brief overview of how position grades are determined. Next, we'll move on to intra-agency deployments for COVID-19 response activities and give you all some insight into how we go about, how officers go about obtaining credit, not only what we're currently doing, but what we have planned in that regard. Next, we'll touch on family separation allowance, give you some understanding for what that is and who's eligible, how you go about applying for it. Followed by, we'll review the periodic health update for 2021, what's new for submitting your periodic health update, your PHU in 2021. Next, we'll briefly touch on the most recent CCHQ Town Hall update and provide you some of the highlights from that call. We will then turn to a follow-up from the last all-hands call and review some of the topics that we had indicated we'd provide some follow-up on to our officers. And then we'll round out our discussion by answering some of your questions. I'll start with some questions that were posed to us in our IHS core inquiries box, and from there we'll move to your verbal or your questions in our chat box. So let's go ahead and get started. PHS officer eligibility for positions. So first consideration for officers is that commissioned officers apply for merit promotion positions. The IHS merit promotion plan applies to the filling of all competitive positions within the general schedule. And so when officers apply for positions, they should be looking for positions that are open under the merit promotion plan. Officers can also apply, depending on the category that they're in, to positions that are announced under the direct hire authority. When you apply to a position under the direct hire authority, then you are placed on a separate list of merit promotion applicants. But direct hire authority positions are available to those disciplines for which direct hire authority applies. Next consideration is Indian preference. And so a selecting official may not select a non-Indian preference candidate where at least an Indian preference candidate from any source was considered qualified. So many of us probably are already familiar with this, but it bears repeating that when an Indian preference eligible candidate applies for a position, then they have the opportunity to enjoy that preference. And if an officer does not have Indian preference, then, and there is a qualified Indian preference candidate, then they would not be considered under that panel. Next consideration for officers are the standards that are applied to determining the qualifications for positions. And so the Office of Personnel Management produces standards, and those are prescribed in the qualification standards for general schedule positions. In addition to that, there may be OPM-approved single agency standards that could be used to determine the minimum qualifications. But those, starting with the OPM standards, there are minimum qualifications that apply to positions that officers may apply to and should be mindful of when reviewing the announcement. Again, as a reminder, if no Indian preference candidates are identified for the vacancy, then non-Indian preference officers will have their qualifications evaluated by human resources against the qualification requirements of the position and will be referred to the selecting official for consideration if they meet the qualification requirements. The next step in the application process is determining suitability. And so any applicant that applies for a position for federal employment, and again, what we're discussing today does relate to federal employment. So to our officers that are assigned to tribal organizations or even some that might be at urban Indian organizations, the information we are sharing does not apply to those settings. However, should you ever consider applying to a federal position, hopefully this is helpful. So again, suitability requirements must be satisfied. And so that's the second step after an officer applies and is considered for selection, receives a tentative offer, then they undergo, just like any other applicant, the suitability process. And it's listed there how suitability determinations are determined and what governs them. So the regulations and standards that are indicated. So looking a little closer at minimum qualifications, where would you find them? You'd find them on the announcement. Your minimum qualifications oftentimes will describe the experience required for the position. Minimum qualifications, depending on the position that's being announced, might also include the requirement for certain licenses, say for a specific profession. In addition to minimum qualifications, there may also be selective factors. And what selective factors do is they identify any additional qualifications that are deemed essential by the hiring program for the position or the job. So for example, there could be a selective factors related to language ability. So there could also be selective factors related to the selectee having a specific registration or certification, such as the contracting officer's representative certification as one example, the COR, and perhaps a certain level of COR. What's important to note is that it's up to the officer to submit sufficient information to permit human resources to determine whether he or she meets that qualification, the selective factors. So it's important to look at those selective factors and when applying, ensuring that you are highlighting or making it clear how those factors are met. Next, when applying, it's important to think about what sources. And again, we're speaking of federal positions, but usajobs.gov is your primary source for going to and applying, reviewing and applying to federal positions. There may in some cases be an announcement, and the announcement may invite the submission of a CV to a specific point of contact. And so that at times can be another means for officers to apply. And when we think about the CV, I'd like to encourage all of us to consider we certainly have our own category-specific CVs that we're all very familiar with, especially this time of the year when we're finalizing our promotion packages. But a category-specific commission officer CV may not be the best format for communicating your qualifications for a specific job that is a civil service announcement, a merit promotion announcement. So just something to consider. You may want to adapt your PHS CV into a more civilian style or civilian friendly CV format so that you can more clearly communicate your qualifications and have it tailored to that announcement. Additionally, there can be within the announcement itself a list of other required documents that are necessary in order to be considered. And those can include things such as transcripts. So it's important to look at that list of required documents and ensure that when you do apply, that you include those so that you can get consideration. Next, we'll move on to PHS officer position grades. So what we'll do is provide an overview of how position grades are determined. So starting with the foundation, and that's the position description. So within the Indian Health Service, officers are applying for civil service general schedule positions. And those general schedule positions are determined, the duties are governed by the position descriptions. So that's really important when we think about what grade, and when we talk about grade, we're talking about 03, 04, 05, 06, etc. What grade could be assigned to that position? Again, the foundation is what does the position description say about the major duties and qualifications of the position. So it's really important to know that that's really the standard when it comes to making a position grade determination. The next consideration is what is the general schedule grade equivalence? And these are general guidelines, but I believe that they're helpful for officers to be aware of. So in general, a position that has a GS grade of 14 or 15 is going to equate to an 06. 13 would be an 05, 1204, 1103, and a 902. These are our general guidelines, and there can be some situations in which officers perhaps might find themselves able to get an 06 position, say for certain GS13 positions, but you wouldn't find an officer who is working in a GS11 position having an 06 position grade. So it's just some important context to know that there has to be some degree of concordance between the general schedule and the position grade that's assigned. What are some other considerations? I think these are really helpful in framing our understanding of how position grades are arrived. And they include what the required experience is for the position. We'd find that in the PD to be successful in the job. Whether the position has supervisory status, is this a supervisory position or not? What's the degree of complexity of the work that the position does? What are the impacts of the judgment exercised on the part of an incumbent in that position? Are the impacts local, regional? Could they have national impacts? Direction, what's the degree of the direction that the incumbent in that position receives? Next, guidelines and originality. Are there guidelines that guide the work that that individual might do, or are there very few guidelines and a successful incumbent is expected to be original in coming up with and conducting the duties and responsibilities of the position? Lastly, the persons contacted and what the purpose of the contact. Looking at the scope of those contacts and whether those are within the organization and outside of the organization. Next, let's talk about legacy billets versus direct access billet system positions. Because oftentimes, I know it's part of our lexicon, still hardwired, I believe, and we often hear officers talking about how do I get a billet upgrade? And so really the legacy billets, important to know that the legacy billet system and the legacy billets are what you see on your personnel order. Those don't control what shows up on your promotion information report, the PIR. It's actually the direct access billet system position that determines the grade and appears on your PIR. And so how that works out is that what we do within DCPS is we look at your position description, and then we align your position description duties to a DABS position that's associated with a certain grade. Typically looking for other pre-existing DABS positions that are already out there, or positions that are similar to what is described in your position description. But in some cases, there aren't any. And so we go through a process of evaluating that position description and proposing to CCHQ a new DABS position. The legacy billet, as I mentioned, really is, in many respects, a placeholder. And although the information, say, for example, the legacy billet name will show up on your personnel order, it really is designed to fit or align with the DABS position, because it doesn't control what your position grade is. It doesn't determine whether you're in an 05 or an 06 position or not. It's the DABS position. So how do we determine the DABS position grade? Well, we've discussed that the primary source is the position description itself. We do, for context purposes, consider the GS grade. We look at, as we've mentioned, whether it's non-supervisory or supervisory or not. And there are also some considerations that are built into certain DABS positions, officer experience and qualifications. In other words, for a given position, a given PD, an officer, for example, a pharmacist who has less than 5 years of experience may qualify for a 04 staff pharmacist position, but once they achieve more than 5 years of experience, along with some additional certifications, may qualify for an 05 advanced practice pharmacist position, just as an example. So I raised that so that you could see that there are some officer-centric factors that can come into play in determining the position, but ultimately it still points back to what does the position description say. So how do we go about updating the position description grade? Well, the primary strategy is to look at the position description itself and evaluate it. Does it need to be revised? Does it truly capture the scope of the duties that the officer is performing? And we do have to remember that position descriptions are written for the duties that the program needs performed, not necessarily for that specific officer. You might have some instances where officers bring to the table, because of the nature of our training and experience, a wide variety of skill sets that sometimes far exceed what the position description describes. But that doesn't necessarily mean that to the program it would make sense to modify the position description to match that officer, because then what happens when the officer leaves? So it doesn't mean that you don't consider officer factors and whether to revise a position description, but that isn't the sole determinant. Sometimes, in some cases, it could make sense to actually develop a new position description altogether. And again, these are great topics to have conversations, for officers to have conversations with their supervisors. If you feel that the scope of your duties exceed that of your position description, and you feel that there is merit to exploring the possibility of a position upgrade. So we've talked about some of the officer factors already. Years of experience, whether you have a post-commissioning degree. So for example, if you are an engineer and you have a bachelor's degree, did you get a master's degree in engineering? Likewise for other professions. Did you get a degree after the qualifying degree that you came in as an officer? And then do you possess specialized certificates? Now I'd like to transition over to talking about intra-agency deployments for COVID-19 response activities and how credit is obtained. So let's start with eligibility. So officers deployed for agency-specific COVID-19 outbreak response activities, in theory, could be considered eligible for deployment credit. So how do we determine that? What are some examples of activities that could qualify? I'd like to encourage you all to ask yourself this question. Due to COVID-19, my duties require that, and then fill in the blank with perhaps one of the following. Provide care for patients with COVID-19. Participate in duty station COVID-19 response efforts, such as you're a member of the ICS team. You perform screening or testing activities. You perform contact tracing duties. Perhaps you administer COVID-19 vaccines. And in addition, you may be participating in infrastructure or other operational support or enhancement activities, such as being involved in construction or facility changes to accommodate the mission to be able to deliver care to patients that have COVID-19. Or perhaps you've been involved in contracting and logistics to ensure an adequate supply of supplies, or even perhaps the vaccines to ensure that patients have access to the treatments that they need, and that our providers and staff have the equipment and resources that they need to provide care to patients with COVID-19. So currently the process for obtaining credit is that area directors or their designee provide to DCPS a list of officers that contain the following information that you see there. So we have officer data that we're collecting, duty station data that we're collecting, and deployment data. And the deployment data is where the deployment occurred. And this could be that really you were quote-unquote deployed for these intra-agency COVID-19 response activities at your same duty station. And that is perfectly acceptable. We're just looking for where did you perform the COVID-19 response activities, so the city and the state and what those duties were. Another mechanism is that officers can submit a TDY memo that's signed by their supervisor if they were placed in a TDY for a specific role in COVID-19 response activities. That should include the activities that they performed and the duration of time that they performed them. But before you guys make a note that I need to go out and get a TD memo to capture the activities, stay tuned. We're going to also go through a proposed mechanism for us to be able to gather more information from you all so that we can, to the best of our abilities, capture all officer activities related to COVID-19 response. So when we receive that information, either from the area directors or their designee, or in some cases, we've received some TDY memos, DCPS regularly submits lists of the officers considered eligible for deployment credit, taking that information, and we submit it to the Readiness and Deployment Branch. RDB, the Readiness and Deployment Branch, has indicated that they have 60 days after the end of the public health emergency to assign deployment credit. So at this time, we have not received word that there is a deadline in which to get this information in. It's been an ongoing submission since the end of March, and we continue to provide that information to RDB. So, looking forward, DCPS, as I mentioned, we would like to lower the bar and increase our awareness, lower the bar to information, and increase our awareness of the activities that our officers are performing in response to COVID-19. So we'll be releasing a survey to officers in the coming weeks, and that will be for the purposes of requesting information on what COVID-19 response activities that you are performing. We'll be asking some clarifying questions because we do know that not every officer that's performing COVID-19 response activities is doing that on a day-to-day basis or a full-time basis. We do have officers that are performing periodic response activities. And what we'd like you to do when you receive this survey request, and we'll try to make it as easy for you to communicate this to us as we can, but we'd like you to denote the activities in number of days within a certain time frame. So, for example, if for 3 months you spent 1 day a week doing contact tracing activities, then we would be collecting the day range of those 3 months, but we would ask the clarifying question of how many days did you perform that activity, so that we could communicate the number of days to RDB for deployment credit, because really that's the unit of measure for determining deployment credit is in days. Validated information. After the survey is closed and we compile the results, then what we'll do is we'll take that compiled list of your responses and we'll provide it to your leadership for validation. And after that validation occurs, that validated information will be what is provided to CCHQ for consideration for deployment credit. Now I'd like to move on to family separation allowance and describe what that is and what the process is for applying for it. So the family separation allowance provides compensation for added expenses incurred because of an enforced family separation. There's 3 types. So the first one is the family separation allowance restricted type, and that aligns with the FSA 1 in the Commission Core Policy on Family Separation Allowance 1 or 2P. And essentially, it governs situations in which a transport of dependents is not authorized at the government's expense, and dependents of that officer do not live within the officer's permanent duty station or area that they are assigned, as you'll see, as long as it's 31 days or more. So it does not necessarily need to be a permanent change of station, as well as situations in which transportation of dependents is authorized, but the dependent cannot accompany an officer due to a certified medical reason, and the officer elects an unaccompanied tour. Or lastly, when government quarters or housing facilities are not adequate and available for the officer's assignment. The second one is a ship allowance, and so it only applies to officers that are assigned to shipboard duty. And lastly, and the one that likely come up more often for our officers is the family separation allowance temporary, or FSA T, or in our policy, the core policy FSA 2T. Officers in those situations are in temporary duty or assignment or a temporary additional duty from their primary duties, and because of those temporary duties are away from the permanent station continuously for more than 30 days. So that's day 31 and on, and the dependents are not residing at or near the TDY location. So who's eligible? Officers first must have dependents. Separation must be for 31 days or more. The officer must be assigned to a location more than 50 miles from their primary duty station, and officers must submit documentation within 90 days of the separation. So what is the process for submitting a request? So the officer would prepare a memo to the regional liaison, and that memo would pass through their supervisor stating the following. What type of FSA are you requesting? What were the dates of the separation, and where were you assigned? What are the names, address, age, and relationship of the dependents that you had during the time of the separation? There should be an indication of whether the separation was directed by the agency or by the Public Health Service. And lastly, a signature of the officer and their supervisor. The officer prepares the memo and then combines that memo with documentation that supports the separation. such as the TDY memo, personnel orders, or official travel orders. And that documentation should be sent to the regional liaison team. The regional liaison will review the memo and the supporting documentation, making an eligibility determination, and the liaison will submit the package if a concurrence can be granted that the officer is eligible to Commission Corps Headquarters Financial Services Branch. Next, let's go over the periodic health update, the PHU, for 2021. So in 2020, officers who did not submit a PHU in 2020 were determined to not be required to do so unless your PHU is due before March 1 of 2020. So for the vast majority of officers, they were not required to submit a PHU in 2020, although some did. For 2021, there is now an updated checklist, and guidance is now available from CCHQ. I was able to locate it last night, so if you want to go to the medical affairs section within CCMIS, you will see the updated checklist and guidance for 2021, so it's now available. PHU requirements will resume or have resumed here in January. So if your birth month is in January, you actually have until the end of March to complete your and submit your PHU. Otherwise, your PHU is due by the end of the month following your birth month. So officers are encouraged to, if you can, get it done the month preceding your birth month, recognizing you have your birth month and to the end of the following month to submit your PHU. Here's some, from the checklist, here's some changes that have been made, some accommodations, if you will, for officers obtaining PHUs in 2021. So after making reasonable attempts to obtain your PHU in person, medical affairs will accept a PHU that, for example, contains a virtual physical examination. Perhaps you weren't able to be seen in person, but you were able to have a visit by telehealth. That could be accepted. It could contain a report of a dental exam that was done within 12 months. Or perhaps because of the COVID-19 pandemic and the limited accessibility of dental services, you weren't able to obtain a dental exam. And so there's the opportunity to notate that on that checklist that you were unable to obtain a dental exam. So there are some flexibilities to make it more feasible for some officers to complete as many of the PHU requirements as possible. Now, in terms of the availability to obtain the PHU, I know this question came up last month in particular, and so we received an update from CCHQ that since the beginning of December of 2020, Walter Reed National Military Medical Center does allow PHS officers to schedule a PHU for the first part of the month before an officer's birthday month. So that's something that should be available to you, and we encourage you to go ahead and try to make those appointments if you are in the DC metro area. Medical Affairs Branch also notified us that they've been actively engaging military treatment facilities throughout the country, as well as IHS sites, to ensure the awareness of what the PHU requirements are and to facilitate officer access to appointments. So Medical Affairs has been working on behalf of officers to try to reach out to providers of PHUs to work through potential barriers and increase awareness of what the requirements are. Next, we'll move on to Commission Corps Town Hall updates from the December Town Hall. So touching on the highlights, the COVID-19 vaccine. So it was mentioned on the Town Hall that officers are not required at this time to obtain the COVID-19 vaccine. However, obtaining the COVID obtaining the vaccine is encouraged. In fact, our very own Surgeon General did receive the COVID-19 vaccine, and I'm sure other officers have as well. And so I want to encourage our officers to strongly consider obtaining the COVID-19 vaccine. Next, let's discuss the Ready Reserve. And to quote the information that was shared with agency liaisons, reservists will be a cadre of part-time civilian health professionals available to provide direct clinical care. That's what CCHQ is envisioning with the reservists. Notably, applications opened in October of 2020. The application process and commission requirements are the same as for active duty applicants. There will be more information that is released about retirement benefits, medical benefits, and how training points will be assigned. Active duty officers can transfer to the Ready Reserve if they have no more than 10 years of service. An important point. So only those officers that have less than 10 years of service. The Ready Reserve is designed to augment the active component, not designed necessarily to replace officers for deployments, although in some cases, based on the specialty of that reserve officer, they may be called up, or they may be called up for surge capacity. And commissioning is planned of Ready Reserve officers by CCHQ to commence sometime in the spring of 2021. Let's move on to some follow-up items from our last all-hands call in December. Are there any updates from CCHQ on what can be done for officers who are receiving HPSP agreements that expired during the suspension of retirements? No, not at this time. We don't yet have updates from CCHQ. How that'll be handled, we'll continue to raise that issue and in coordination with our other colleagues within the other agencies so that we can provide that information to officers that have been impacted by this scenario. We do have guidance for officers who did have transitional HPSP agreements, and those really relate to medical and dental officers that were able to sign up for transitional HPSP agreements to allow them to align their special pay for a planned retirement. CCHQ has acknowledged the need to provide an extension of THPSP for officers under this program, and they have indicated that they will do so until 12/31/21 or the officer's retirement date, whichever comes first. If your THPSP paid has been impacted by the suspension and retirements, please reach out to your regional liaison team so we can assist in coordinating with CCHQ to ensure that your THPSP pay is extended out in accordance with those limits that are described. Next item. So are former or current pharmacy residents eligible to receive a session bonus? So the update is that DCPS has engaged stakeholders within IHS pharmacy leadership as well as the pharmacy chief professional officer on this matter. And we are committed to continuing to work to obtain a final determination from CCHQ regarding accession bonus eligibility for former and current pharmacy residents. So more to come. We hope to be able to provide greater definition to where we stand with this and hopefully a final determination in the near future, hopefully next month. So what are some of the ways in which position grades can be reevaluated? We touched on this earlier in today's call, but this was an item that was specifically raised, and so just to look at it again. And so in some instances, an officer may qualify for a higher position grade due to changes in officer-specific factors such as they earned a post-commissioning degree, or achieved a certain number of years of experience, and there is a position grade that can be applied to that PD that is at a higher grade, but that still aligns with the PD. In other cases, your supervisor can request that your position be reevaluated by human resources through the completion of what's known as a desk audit. The desk audit allows for the officer and the supervisor to engage with human resources and highlight how the nature and the difficulty of the work that is being done may be different from the PD. It's important to bear in mind, though, that although this activity can result in an increase, it could, in some cases, result in a decrease in the grade of the PD. But the potential is that it could qualify the officer for a different position grade. And so that is one pathway. But as we mentioned earlier, the position description determines what the position grade is assigned to it. And so really looking at, does the position description itself need to be updated? When was it last updated? And does it adequately describe the needs of the position and not solely the needs of the officer? So there was a comment made, a question asked, can information about higher level awards such as the DSM, MSM, and OSM with Valor awards be shared? We discussed that as a team, and we believe, yes, there's value in doing that. And so we will be working on developing and releasing a quarterly update to highlight officers who have received such high-level awards, as well as we see value in increasing the overall visibility of awards that are earned by IHS officers. If officers have a greater awareness of the types of awards that are being earned by their fellow officers, the hope is that that inspires more officers to go ahead and engage their supervisors and capture the excellent impacts that you're having, so that more officers can be recognized for the outstanding achievements and impacts to the mission that you are doing day in and day out. We'll now move to answering your questions. And so at this point, we'll go ahead and open up the chat box, and as well as you have the opportunity to verbally present your question. So we'll enable that, but I will start with a question that was submitted to the IHS Core Inquiries email box. The question was, will hazardous duty pay be authorized for officers in direct response to the COVID-19 pandemic? And the latest information we have is that a decision memo was sent to the Office of the Assistant Secretary for Health for review, and that's currently under review. So we don't have a definitive answer, but we do know that the decision memo has been submitted and is currently under review. The successor question to the initial question was, if the hazardous duty pay is authorized, how will the officer supervisor certify that the officers have met the designated criteria? And so we'll have more information to share on that once we get a decision that hazardous duty pay is ultimately authorized. Because that is a really good question, is we want to be able to communicate to our officers what the certification or validation process might be so that officers are aware. There were two additional questions related to it that, again, we'll be able to provide more information once we receive word that hazardous duty pay is in fact approved. And the last question, does it matter if officers are assigned to a tribal 638 facility. We'll have definitive answer to that again once we get word on the approval status, although it's not expected that that would have any bearing on whether an officer qualified. It's more likely to be the case that if an officer is performing duties that are consistent with the exposure that qualifies them for the hazardous duty pay, that they would be eligible to receive it. But again, more definitive response will be made available once we receive final word from the approval. So thank you to the officers that submitted those questions. All right. So at this time, we'll entertain any questions that we have from you all. Mr. Conley will be from our DCPS Southeast Regional Team. We'll be reading any responses that we receive in the chat box, and our operator will open up the mic to anyone that has any verbal questions they'd like to pose.
And thank you, sir. And as a reminder, if you would like to ask a question, please press star
Operator,
1
do we have any
on your
questions?
telephone keypad. And I'm showing no questions on the phones. Again, that's star 1 on your telephone keypad.
Yes, sir. Go ahead.
This is from Elizabeth Husselcuss. Are there any updates to the policy of suspended retirements?
So for suspended retirements, we have been able to submit retirement requests for officers who would like to begin their retirement after April 1 of 2021. So we have begun to submit retirement packages from officers, and so officers are able to submit their documentation, bearing in mind that officers need to allow sufficient time in advance, as 90 days, the package needs to be submitted to CCHQ at least 90 days before the last day the officer is on duty. Thank you. Good question. Is there another question, Mr. Colley?
Captain, as of now, there are no questions in the queue for the chat box. We have one person typing.
Thank you. Operator, are there anyone in queue for a question on the line?
And no, sir, I'm showing no questions at this time.
Captain, we have another question from the chat box.
Excellent.
How do we apply for a exceptional performance promotion?
So the exceptional performance, the EPPs, promotions, are announced in the fall. So typically in the October time frame, there is information that is provided. We receive a list of eligible officers, and that is communicated to leadership. So that typically comes out in the fall period.
We have a few more typing in the chat box, Captain.
Thank you.
Okay, sir, I have a question. It is from Captain Bradley. How will CCHQ meet their 500 call to active duty goal based on previous performance shown on a slide of only 108 or so call to active duty during fiscal year 2020?
Thank you. Good question. CCHQ has their recruitment goals, and so we play a role in terms of IHS plays a role in contributing to those recruitment goals, and we have certainly increased our coordination within IHS between the Division of Commissioned Personnel Support and the recruitment branch within the Office of Human Resources, increasing our partnerships with them and engaging regularly with them, as well as we now have regular engagement with the recruiting team at Commission Corps headquarters. And our recruitment efforts are led by Captain Stephen Navarro, our Southwest Regional Liaison. And so we've appreciated the additional partnership and have had great opportunities to do our part to help address those vacancies that we have within our agency. CCHQ has worked with the agencies and given us as agencies the opportunity to share what our best practices, what has worked well, and even given us the opportunity to provide feedback on the challenges that we've encountered. So that has been a great way for us to increase their awareness of how recruitment occurs for positions within the Indian Health Service and some of the challenges that we encounter. So it's certainly a work in progress, but we have made some great strides in this past year to improve the throughput of applicants into positions as commissioned officers in the Indian Health Service. Is there another question, Mr. Collins?
Yes, Captain. I have one more question as long as a comment as well from CW. I guess the audio might have had some technical difficulty through the entirety. If the presentation is inaudible, will it be re-recorded?
We will certainly look at that. It is certainly possible to record again the presentation. Our goal is to not only provide you the information we've done today in a live fashion, but make the information enduring. And so we will definitely take a look at the audio quality, and if it needs to be recorded, ensure that that happens.
Another question from Nicole Lawrence. Do officers need to complete paperwork for the promotion, or is it completed by our facility leadership?
So, speaking of promotions in general, it's the officer's responsibility to ensure that all of their promotion documentation is completed. So, hopefully you've had the opportunity to review CCMIS, the CCMIS promotions page. There's a really nice checklist for promotion year 2021 that outlines all of the steps, all of the actions that need to be taken by officers, and what the deadlines are. So it's very important that officers themselves ensure that they're on track to meet those deadlines, working with their leadership to do so. So it's a partnership. Officers do, to an extent, rely upon the partnership of their leadership to get the elements needed to complete their promotion package. But I want to encourage officers that ultimately the responsibility falls on you to ensure that your promotion package is complete. But we're available on DCPS through our regional teams and here at headquarters to help support you and as you navigate through that process.
And we have another question from Captain Buell. Can the PD desk audit to possibly increase the billet start now, or is it just in a preliminary process stage?
So if you believe that a desk audit, the first thing you want to do is talk to your supervisor, because it's the supervisor that requests the desk audit. So that's the first step, is talk to your supervisor about a desk audit. And if your supervisor agrees that a desk audit may be appropriate, then reaching out to the regional HR team, they're a stakeholder in the process, of course, but also ensure that you include your regional commission core liaison. So my summary advice is to talk to your supervisor, and if your supervisor believes that there's merit to that, then connect with us through your regional team, and let's look at ways to move forward and explore completing a desk audit.
Okay, sir, next question, Chantel Bloom. How many regional liaisons do we have?
So we have our regions include the Southeast region, which includes the Nashville area, the Oklahoma City area, and the Albuquerque area. And the Southeast regional team includes Commander Frank and Mr. Colley. We also have the Northern Plains regional team. So that is covering the Great Plains area, the Bemidji area, and the Billings area. That is comprised of Ms. Davidson, Ms. Dudley. And then we have the Navajo regional liaison team, and that's comprised of Lieutenant Commander Hatch as the liaison. We have Ms. Damon and Ms. Tapto. Also on the team, we have the Southwest regional team, which covers the Phoenix and the Tucson areas. And that's led by Captain Stephen Navarro and Ms. Gladys Montello. And lastly, we have the Western regional team that is Captain Wansa and Ms. Turner. They cover the Alaska area, the Portland area, and the California area. And then at headquarters, we have Captain Matungwa and myself provide support to our officers. And that information is also available on our DCPS website, on the DCPS website within the Indian Health Service website. And so if you go to IHS.gov, you could just type in the search section, a little search bar, DCPS. DCPS page will come right up, and then you'll find links to contacting your regional liaison.
Hey, Captain, we have another question from the chat box. So Sonia Nez was told by then area liaison that IHS officers do not receive exceptional performance promotions as they are reserved for people who do research in the field. So he told me that my write-up package, which was initiated by the CEO at the time of the facility, would not be moved forward. Was this true of this matter? So the exemplary performance promotion was never considered. So again, I think that's based on the EPP.
Sure. Thank you for that question. And so what I'd like to do is, for that specific case, please reach out to Captain Matungwa and I. Let's get connected with the regional team. We'll get connected with the regional team for where you're located, and let's take a closer look so that we can determine what happened in that particular situation. We look forward to hearing from you.
And we have another question from Lynn Van Pelt, Portland area. Are there plans to host a virtual webinar on retirement?
My apologies if you can hear the train in the background. That's an excellent idea, and so we'll make a note of that as a follow-up item. I'll have some internal discussion about whether that's something that would be offered through DCPS. We can also survey the landscape and see if there might be some upcoming retirement sessions that are planned through CCHQ directly, or perhaps even some of our sister agencies that officers could participate in. So great idea, and we'll follow up with what we've learned in terms of what's available in the coming in the months to come.
One more question from Captain Bradley, and a comment as well. Due to the recruiting process, is recruiting really the answer? Does the onboarding process need to be overhauled and be made more efficient and transparent?
Great question. And my response is that recruiting, effective recruiting does include onboarding. And so I think that's an important thing to look at, and we have been looking at, because ultimately there's a shelf life to individuals that apply to the Commission Corps, and so we want to reduce as many barriers as possible to helping them to get through the process to becoming commissioned as possible. Because the longer it takes, the more likely we are to lose a candidate. And that information does travel, is shared, that perhaps the word gets out that I'd like to be a commissioned officer, but it takes so much time. And many of us, it did take a long time. So I think that's a very important point. Captain, thank you for bringing that up. And in short answer, we have looked at that, and we'll continue to look at ways that we can reduce barriers in the onboarding process, because we do agree that that does impact our ability to be successful in our recruiting efforts.
Captain, another question from CW on a reassignment billet update type of question. If our billet increases after a desk audit, must we reapply for our position at the duty station? I know several civil servants who have had to reapply when their GS level increased.
Thank you for that. Great question. And what I want to do is commit to providing a definitive answer to that. I think that's a very important question. Thank you for asking that, and we will follow up with the Office of Human Resources and confirm if that is in fact the case. If a desk audit results in an increase in grade, would the officer have to reapply for the position? So thank you for that, and we will follow up and share that with everyone.
And Captain, we have another question from Lieutenant Commander Jessica Graham. It's on a deployment type of question. Can we get an update on on-call status? My status has changed on the dashboard, and my next on-call month has a date again.
Thank you. So I can say that this question came up back in December. And what I'd like to do is share what occurred in December and invite you to reach out to your regional liaison. Feel free to include me as well as Captain Matungwa so that we can address your specific situation. But I did notice, was notified that from another officer that all of this, that now their dashboard showed that they had a particular on-call month. However, at the time, and this was in December, this last month, when you go to the CCMIS, it still had the very clear messaging that all officers, the entire Corps is considered subject to deployment. And that messaging has been in place since, I believe, March. So we'll get some clarification on that, and we can help you address with that your specific scenario. But thank you for that question, and I think and we will get you a response.
Captain, another question from Lynn Van Pelt, Portland area, basically requesting a sit rep on permanent promotions for 2020.
Thank you. We don't have an update on permanent promotions other than we've been told that they're awaiting final approval. And so we do have another meeting with CCHQ coming up, and this has been something that is been important to not only our officers but officers in other agencies, and so we do hope to get clarification on that to be able to share. It has been raised to CCHQ a number of times, and the question asked, when will officers know? Fortunately, we don't have any news to share on it at this time.
A question from Matthew, basically asking if the retirement freeze will affect the rates of promotion for junior officers up to senior officers.
Will the retirement freeze impact the rates of promotion from junior officers to senior officers?
That's correct, sir.
I don't have any insight to share on that at this point, but certainly we can try to flesh that out further with you. So feel free to reach out to we're going to be evaluating all the questions that come into the chat box. We do appreciate you sharing that, and we'll take a closer look, and we may reach out to you for some additional clarification on that. But don't have anything coming to mind to share at this time, but we will get you a response.
Yes, Captain, we have a question from Kathy Frazier, basically about awards and the citation for the nomination being denied based on half of IHS officers are on ICS teams and did these things. Found it disappointing and odd that this approval would be based on whether other officers are doing the same thing. Any insight to help, please?
Certainly. And so in this particular situation, we do want to encourage you to work through a regional team for a case, like for this type of case-by-case situation. But so I'd like to encourage you to take that step so we can look into the particulars of this officer's write-up. But in general, when we're looking at awards, we're looking at, depending on the award type that the officer is seeking, what is the degree to which the officer in the commission of their duties went and above and beyond the extent to which they did, beyond the normal call of duties and the scope of and impacts of the duties that they performed. So let's give us the opportunity to take a closer look at that particular situation and give you some tailored feedback, but that's my initial response to the question. Thank you for the question and the opportunity to take a look at it with you.
Captain, we have a question from Dina Wilson. When will awards from last year be posted to the EOPF?
Great question. Thank you. So any award, all awards that were submitted before midnight on November 6th, we were assured, as the agency, we were assured that those awards would be made available to the promotion boards at the time of officer review. We have seen that some award types, such as service awards, have begun to come through. We've gotten periodic updates from the awards coordinator at CCHQ, keeping us as liaisons, agency liaisons, aware and updated about the progress. But for individual awards, we know that they are on their to-do list. We're still standing on the commitments that they've given us previously, and unfortunately don't have a specific timeline when to expect it. We do know that officers will see their awards show up in their PIR before their EOPF. So continue to watch your PIR, and we continue to maintain awareness of the status of how CCHQ is progressing through the awards that were submitted, and will provide updates as we receive them. Thank you.
Captain, we have a question from J. Cam, basically up the same avenue, EOPF, practice hours being submitted. When will it be set to update an EOPF?
Thank you. Another good question. So practice hours, as those of us know who submitted practice hours, did so using the PDF form last year for our hours, and officers by and large have not received any confirmation that the practice hours in the form of seeing it in their EOPF. The recommendation remains keep the copy of the email submission that you had. I'm not currently aware, but we'll look into it to see if there are any updates, but I haven't heard of any recently on that topic, and just want to ensure officers are aware that you are now able to submit your practice hours within the forms section of the officer secure area. And so that is now the location to submit your practice hours. And one of the nice features, that's the same location in which our cores are initiated. And as with the cores, you're able to track the progress of it through the review. So it at least gives us greater visibility on where that's at. But in short, I don't have an update to share with anyone at this time on when we can expect the practice hours to show up in the EOPF. But we will seek some clarification and follow up.
Captain, we have another question from Gail Runberg. We're touching back on the COVID awards and deployments avenue. Most have March 1st, 2020 date associated with them. What about the officers that deployed in February? Will they be included in the awards going forward? Also, Mrs. Robin Davidson is available by mic to address awards questions.
Thank you. And so there are the campaign medal, the COVID-19 campaign medal, hit officers' PIRs, and so that's for officers that were on duty during the time frame in accordance with the policy. And so that's different than an officer getting a deployment award or deployment credit for their COVID-19 response activities.
As of right now, Captain, I'm showing no questions in the chat box.
Okay. Operator, are there anyone in queue for a verbal question?
I am showing no questions at this time. And as a reminder, please press star 1 if you would like to ask a question.
All right. We'll make one more call for questions to the chat box. We're approaching the top of the hour. About 10 minutes left. But
Captain, we have a request to call upon Mrs. Robin Davidson to address awards.
Okay. And if you could provide the question for Ms. Davidson, we'll be happy to give her the opportunity to address it as our IHS Awards Award Coordinator. Somebody could just put back in the chat box the specific question that they have.
Captain, that request is for any award question in general within the past questions.
Okay. So let's, operator, can we unmute Ms. Davidson's line? I believe we're going to need a number to do that. While we're waiting for that, are there any other questions? Or perhaps we could make Ms. Davidson a presenter so that her line could be unmuted.
Yes, if she can press star 0, I can unmute her line.
While we do that, I just want to remind everyone of the DCPS website available at ihs.gov. It's a great repository of resources such as past webinars, including the all hands call. So you'll find the recordings there as well as the slides. Frequently asked questions, the links to the regional offices as well as additional officer resources. So I want to encourage you to avail yourself of the resources and information that are available to you on the website. We continue to make strides to upgrade and improve the quality and the functionality of the website and the materials contained therein. Have we had the opportunity to unmute Ms. Davidson or make her presenter?
No, sir. She has not pressed star 0.
If we aren't successful, what we'll do is take the questions and work with Ms. Davidson to provide responses to the questions that were posed in a manner that everyone can access them. And we may do that through the website or some other means, but the request is heard. We will get Ms. Davidson to weigh in on the awards-related questions that have been proposed today. Last call for other questions or ability to enable Ms. Davidson to provide some comments.
Captain, operator, can we unmute 2196, please?
2916. Is that correct?
Okay.
I'm sorry, that was
Operator?
2916.
Operator is still online, sir.
Okay.
Yes,
Well,
I'm here.
We will certainly look at the questions that have been posed related to awards, and we will, as I said, get Ms. Davidson and the entire team input on providing responses. And please feel free to send any additional questions to the IHS Core Inquiries box. As we've got it displayed on the screen, IHS Core Inquiries at ihs.gov. We appreciate everyone's attention and participation in today's call. And as a reminder, our next IHS Core Officers All Hands call will be on February 3rd, 2020, at the same time, 3:30 p.m. Eastern. And with that, I will thank you for your time. And pending one last call, is there any other questions in the chat box before we close?
Captain Verdugo, can you hear me, sir?
Operator, please, the last four is 2196. Trying to get Mrs. Davidson unmuted, sir.
Yes, her line is unmuted. She's trying to speak now.
Captain Verdugo, can you hear me, sir?
I believe we're still having technical difficulties, Captain.
Okay. All right. Well, any other questions in the chat box before we close then?
The chat box is saying that they can hear Mrs. Davidson, I believe.
Can you hear me, sir?
Is anyone else able to hear Ms. Davidson from our DCPS coordinating team? Negative.
Ms. Tapso from Navajo was able to hear her, as well as Mrs. Damon from Navajo.
And this is Calvin. Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right. Yes, I've been trying to let you know that Ms. Davidson's line is open. She's been trying to speak, but it seems like you guys couldn't hear her.
Yes, I was unable to hear her.
That's correct. I'm not able to hear her on mine.
Ma'am, could you try again?
Captain Verdugo, can you hear me, sir?
Yes, loud and clear. Excellent. Thank you.
Perfect. Yay. Thank you, operator.
Thank you, operator.
For the issues here of me trying to connect. So awards, and I'm going through the chat. So I will start at the top. So Kathy Frazier recently nominated 2 subordinates for awards related to the exceptional COVID response efforts. The awards were disapproved based on half of IHS officers on the IHS teams and did these things. Found it disappointing and odd that disapproval would be based on whether other officers are doing the same thing. Any insight? Absolutely. Kathy, so when it comes to COVID-related awards, what we really want to look at from a promotion board or IHS awards coordinator standpoint is what sets those officers apart from any other officer doing, let's say, contact tracing. So what is unique to that officer and what their role was in contact tracing at your service unit or at the area that sets them apart. In addition, another option to consider for areas or for regions is potentially taking all the contact tracing for that area and put it in for a UC or OUC. That is another option that you can definitely look at. And Kathy, if I didn't answer your question, please feel free to add any more questions in the comments box. When will awards from last year be posted to the EOPF from Dana Wilson? Currently, the COVID-19 awards was the first batch that updated. Commission Corps Headquarters is currently working on all prior or sister service awards to be updated. Once that's done, then they will move on to all of the Commission Corps awards. We have been reassured that awards will be updated on officers' PIRs by the time they pull promotion boards. If for any reason you want to know the status of a particular award from either 2019 or 2020, you can absolutely reach out to your awards board coordinators in your region, or you can send an email to IHS for CORPS awards@ihs.gov, and we can at least give you the date that it was submitted to CCHQ and that we have it currently being tracked by our section. So Gail Lundberg, regarding core level COVID awards and deployments, most have a 3/1/2020 date associated with them. Will there be included in the awards going forward? So at this point, and Gail, let me know if I'm not answering or understanding your question correctly, but any officer at this point can submit an award for COVID-related activities. It is absolutely within your purview to submit it through and up to your area board coordinator for the board review first and then on to the IHS Awards Board. If you do have officers who deployed in February for COVID-related activities, there's two routes you can go. One is a route through RDB, if it is an RSA or similar to that. If it's an individual award, you can most certainly submit it with a February date. Although it was not really identified as a public health emergency and declared until March 1st, you can most certainly use an early start date for the award period. Just know that the nominator's signature cannot be more than 13 months from the end date of the award period. Let's see. So, Dina Wilson, you asked, can we document our award if it is not yet in the EOPS? I would highly encourage you not to. Awards are not technically awarded to you until they actually show up on your PIR. And the reason why is at any point in the approval process, your award can change. In many cases, we've had awards be upgraded by Rear Admiral Miyake or by the Area Awards Board Chair. So in that
Ms. Davidson, are you still on the line? Mr. Collier, are you able?
Captain, I am here. I'm not able to hear Mrs. Davidson.
I believe that we have lost contact with Ms. Davidson.
Okay. Well, that's unfortunate. Thank you, Ms. Davidson, for joining the call. I do also want to recognize that it is past our completion time. So to respect everyone's time, we'll go ahead and close the call, but we will attend to any remaining questions in the chat box, including those that relate to awards, and ensure that you get responses. So I'd like to, again, thank everyone for participating in today's call. We hope that you have a happy new year, a wonderful rest of your January, and we look forward to connecting with you again, if not sooner, but no later than February 3rd at our next all-hands call. Thank you so much. Everyone is free to drop.
Thank you. That concludes today's conference. You may disconnect at this time. Thank you for your participation. Speakers, please stand by.